Our first reading this morning is Psalm 99 from the Laughing Bird version. You, Lord, rule over everything, enthroned in glory, surrounded by awesome creatures. Your presence sends shivers down our spines and makes even the earth tremble and quake. Lord, your greatness is celebrated in Zion, and in every nation you are number one. At the mere mention of your name, people everywhere burst into praise, for your greatness and holiness are awesome. Ruling in strength, loving justice with a passion, you have seen to it that everyone gets a fair go. You have laid down the law so that your people will do what is right. We fall at your feet and sing your praises, O Lord our God, for your greatness and holiness are awesome. Moses and Aaron served you as priests. Samuel was another who reached out to you. They cried out to you on the world's behalf, and from the awesome clouds you answered them. They stuck to what you had told them, Lord, and did whatever you asked of them. When they did wrong, you set them straight in no uncertain terms. But you forgave them, Lord, and never failed to answer them. We sing your praises, O Lord our God. We climb your holy mountain to worship you, for your greatness and holiness are awesome. This morning's second reading is Philippians 4, 1 through 9, in the New Revised Standard Version. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, whom I love and long for, my joy and crown, stand firm in the Lord in this way, my beloved. I urge Euodia and I urge Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. Yes, and I ask you also, my loyal companion, help these women, for they have struggled beside me in the work of the gospel, together with Clement and the rest of my co-workers, whose names are in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. The Lord is near. Do not worry about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Keep on doing the things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you.
Since my return from sabbatical, I have been setting aside a portion of my sermon to tell sabbatical stories, because you all are nice enough to grant me a sabbatical, so it's fair that I let you in on how I spent my time. But in order to do that, see, and here's the other thing. I've been telling you a lot about my sabbatical activities, but I haven't said a whole lot about my reflections. So I think, to be fair, I need to talk about reflections on my sabbatical. But in order to do that, I've got to go back to my 2016 sabbatical. That one started on the second week of July and ended on the second week of October. And during that 2016 sabbatical, I did a lot more traveling and a lot more camping than I did on the sabbatical from this summer. I also made a decision to engage in a personal news blackout. So other than an occasional peek into local news and weather reports, I decided to deliberately avoid national news because I wanted to take a break from my obsessive consumption of news-related podcasts. This was 2016. So for the majority of the summer of 2016, I was out grubbing around in the great outdoors, oblivious to what was going on in the real world, at least as far as national news goes. It's also worth noting that I actually started my news blockade the first week of July because I was directing camp up at CGC. And so technically, I went 13 weeks without news in 2016. So, when I came back from sabbatical and started tuning in to the news again, I wasn't sure whether I was happy or remorseful that I gave up the news for 13 weeks. Part of me even wondered if I had been abducted by aliens on one of my, many camping trips and was placed in some weird, bizarro world simulation just to gauge my reaction. But either way, I learned my lesson, okay? This time around, I decided not to participate in a news blackout. I also did not do as much camping, and when I did, I kept my eyes on the sky, let me tell you. And again, here's what I did, though. I read a lot. I had a lot of books. My reading list this summer consisted of a variety of different books from different genres and different authors. I read the memoir of a woman who was raised and homeschooled in a cultish survivalist community who eventually became a research fellow and teacher at Harvard University. I read a great book on spirituality and spiritual communities by Rainn Wilson, who is the actor who plays Dwight on The Office. I read a mostly lighthearted book about a widowed chemist who was talked into hosting a cooking show during the 1960s. I read a mind-blowing graphic novel by a cultural anthropologist and an award-winning cartoonist. Shonda Jha, who was a former Disciples Associate Regional Minister here in NorCal, wrote a book about the importance of recognizing how we fit into the story of our ancestral heritage. Steve Bryden, he and his wife Pam visited here last week from Pacific Grove. He wrote a book, a history book, about how propaganda has been used during times of war. Most of the books, however, that I read were on the topic of how and why we have become so polarized both as a nation and in our churches. The worst of these books were just rants by the author who thinks that, the only thing we need to do is get back to the good old days, even though what they thought were the good old days weren't so good for other people. The best of these books were written by thoughtful scholars and theologians who encouraged their readers to engage in healthy self-reflection. Now, we all like to think that we are the heroes of our own story, right? But good theology demands that we participate in prayerful self-reflection. As I often say, we need to stop and take a breath and examine our lives and say, am I being Moses in this situation, or am I being Pharaoh? Right? Am I Jesus on Jesus's team, or am I on Caesar's team? This has to happen. Because I've learned from experience that self-reflection without prayer leads to depression. So, I made sure that in my travels, in my studies, in my planning, and in my interaction with others, that I was engaged in prayer. That brings us to the scripture lesson that Connie read earlier in the service. This is the third week in the row that we have been in the book of Philippians, which many of you know is my favorite of Paul's epistles, or his letters to the churches. This book was written to either a single church or a cluster of churches in the city of Philippi, which on today's map would be in the northeast kind of panhandle of Greece. This book is interesting. I like Philippians because it's probably one of the most encouraging letters that Paul wrote to all of the churches that he wrote, what we read in the epistles. In most of his other letters, especially in 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Romans, Paul kind of had to flex his muscles a little and use his conflict resolution skills to make sure that these churches didn't just collapse. So when you look at Philippians, and you get a bird's eye view of this book, The indication here is that the church in Philippi seems to be doing well because he heaps a lot of praise on them for being a church who gets it. The first few sentences of this passage, however, appear to be a word of encouragement directed towards two specific women, Euodia and Syntyche. It sounds like the women might be in conflict because Paul encourages them to be of the same mind in the Lord. He even calls on someone in the church's leadership to help these women. Now, I don't get the impression that this was any kind of serious conflict that threatened the whole mission and ministry of the church. It wasn't a big blow-up or anything like that. It was probably just a little church spat. You know what I'm talking about? You've seen little church spats happen. Maybe you've been involved in little church spats. They're usually over something that seems inconsequential in the big picture, but still, you do not want one of those little spats to grow into something bigger. So it's best to deal with it now so that the work of the gospel can continue. But then Paul shifts gears, and he said, do not worry about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Do not worry about anything. It's not easy for some folks, is it? Especially, I deal with depression. This is not easy for me at all. If there was a competition for worrying or catastrophizing, I would at least be a bronze medalist, okay? My spiritual director tells me it's because I have a lousy abundance consciousness. In other words, I lack faith in God that God will provide a way or the tools to work through a difficult situation. Now, at first, I dismissed this notion. But then I realized that a lot of the things that I worry about are situations that I have little or no control over. I worry about the safety of my middle son who is in the Navy. I worry that my education and training was a waste of time and that I have no marketable skills to contribute to society. I worry about whether I have enough sriracha sauce or duct tape or peanut butter in the house. And that's just the little stuff, In the big picture, I worry that the people of our world have all lost their minds and that we're all on an inescapable path to self-destruction. I worry about the future generations of my family and what's in store for them because the current generations just can't seem to stop fighting with each other long enough to address even our simplest challenges. And yet, here's Paul over here in Philippians saying, rejoice and don't worry about anything. Sounds kind of like that old 80s song by Bobby McFerrin, Don't Worry, Be Happy. Of course, my favorite is Three Little Birds because, Bob Marley, right, Kevin? Yeah. But then my ultimate favorite is a crushingly cynical song called Always Look on the Bright Side of Life from the movie The Life of Brian, where a group of first-century Jewish dissidents are hanging on Roman crosses, whistling and singing, "If life seems jolly rotten, there's something you've forgotten, and that's to laugh and smile and dance and sing. When you're feeling in the dumps, don't be silly chumps, just purse your lips and whistle. That's the thing. And always look on the bright side of life." Da-da, 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 da-da. Okay, yeah. You're welcome for that earworm that you'll have for the rest of the day. So when you pause and reflect on Paul's words here, you realize that he's not just offering platitudes. He's not just saying, don't worry, be happy. He's saying that joy comes with prayer and thanksgiving. It's not something you muster on your own will and gumption. It's something that you cultivate. And so he writes, "Finally, beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Keep on doing the things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you. You don't have to put on a fake smile or be in denial about the things that worry you. Worry's going to happen, right? Worry's going to happen whether we want it to or not. In fact, sometimes I worry more when somebody starts out a sentence with, "No, I don't want you to worry about this, but," right? So for Paul, it's all about your thinking. You want to avoid stinking thinking, right? By fortifying your mind with that which is true, honorable, just, pure, pleasing, and commendable. So whenever I start manifesting lousy abundance consciousness, Amber, my spiritual director, tells me to make a list of gratitudes. Now, if you ask me to make a list of gratitudes on the spot at any given moment, I could do it. I will serve you up a vanilla-flavored list of all the things that you're supposed to say at the Thanksgiving dinner table every year. I will say things like, "Oh, I'm thankful for my family. I'm thankful for my friends. I'm thankful for my dogs and granddogs. I'm thankful for my church, and I'm thankful for where I live. I'm thankful that the turkey isn't dry and there's lots of pumpkin pie," right? But Amber, she's a smart cookie. She's a smart cookie, and she doesn't let me get away with serving up vanilla-flavored anything. Nothing is easy with her. So in the spring of 2019, we were on month number 6 of dealing with the aftermath of the campfire. Not only were we sharing our building with another church, we were trying to run the church from this little office over here beside the chapel because our big office and a quarter of our church was under construction to deal with the flood that happened on April 2nd. One day, Amber said, "When you get up in the morning, before you do anything, before you get out of bed, I want you to text me what you are grateful for today. And no Thanksgiving table gratitudes, no repeats. You tell me the first thing that you are grateful for, and I will tell you mine." So on a decent day, I could conjure one up. On a difficult day, on a day that I was dealing with some depression, I would try something like, "Well, Amber, I'm grateful for you for challenging me to do this." And she said, "I'm grateful for you too, Jesse, but try again." Sometimes it is hard to be grateful, especially when life is extra challenging and your lousy abundance consciousness kicks in and you get scared. One of the authors, a book that I read of hers this summer, Diana Butler Bass, she wrote a book about gratitude a few years ago called Grateful. And she believes that stopping and savoring what is good in the world gives us the motivation to keep working for good. If you lose this ability to savor life, your motivation just goes sour. She goes on to say that part of love and gratitude in difficult times is that nobody should stand over anybody else and say, "You must be grateful," or "You must love so-and-so." Savoring life is an invitation into wrestling through the suffering of the world and discovering compassion and thanksgiving even through the pain. All the wise theologians, mystics, and spiritual leaders throughout history who have been in communities that have been oppressed know that gratitude isn't something that you tell other people to do. It's something that people discover for themselves on this journey that we call life. You should never tell anyone who is suffering that they have to feel some way. But as Paul did with the church in Philippi, We should always, as people of faith, be holding forth invitations into God's best dream for us, and that is to live without fear. As he wrote, keep on doing the things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you.